Everyone, and welcome to this press conference where IMF presents its review of the Finnish economy. My name is Julietta Huttu, and I'm from the Bank of Finland Communications. I'm happy that you are able to join us today. Thank you all for coming. I'm also happy to have with us today Mr. Wojciech Maliszewski, the head of IMF's mission to Finland. He will now present IMF's concluding statement on the Finnish economy. After his presentation, we will turn to your questions. Those of you who are following the press conference online, please leave your question on the comment box, write down your name and the media you represent. Mr. Maliszewski, please start.
Thank you. I'd like to start from thanking Finnish authorities for excellent cooperation during this mission, as always. And we thought that the timing of this mission is actually very good, for two reasons. First, the shock of Russia's aggression on Ukraine is also an economic shock. And part of our policy advice is to address the aftershocks from this war. The second reason is that the parliamentary term in Finland is nearing to an end. And this may be a good timing for thinking about longer-term objectives and longer-term problems that the Finnish economy is facing. And we hope that our assessment will be part or will be an input into the discussion of what the objectives for the new parliamentary term should be. So let me start from the assessment of where the Finnish economy stands today and what is the outlook. There has been a very strong recovery last year, and in the first half of this year, this recovery continues. This is to a large extent thanks to very effective support policies extended by the government during the pandemic, but also it's a testament to the success of pre-pandemic structural reforms implemented as part of the government program. So especially the reforms to boost employment now are paying off. The employment rate is the highest that we've seen in decades. But Russia's war in Ukraine has halted the recovery and has worsened the outlook. The direct impact of the war has been relatively contained, and relative to many other European countries, Finland is actually less exposed to higher energy prices. But high energy prices nevertheless feed to inflation. This in turn requires monetary policy to tighten more. And these taken together is reducing household purchasing power, confidence, and also ultimately it will reduce demand. Externally, the economic environment has also worsened. And ultimately, over time, this will reduce Finnish exports and corporate investments. So taken together, our assessment is that the economy will come to a halt, or economic growth will come to a halt next year after a relatively robust performance this year when we project around 2% growth. Now, an important aftershock or important impact of the war is also that it has increased spending pressures, fiscal spending pressures. This spending is largely on security needs and also to partly shield households from higher energy prices. Compared to pre-pandemic path, we expect that the fiscal position will worsen by around 0.5 percentage point next year, and even more in the medium term, by around 1 percentage point. So this is a significant deterioration, and this comes on top of already relatively high discretionary spending previously enacted in the government program. What is important to realize is also that it considerably worsens the public sector debt dynamics. We expect that the debt will increase from the current ratio of around 72% to GDP to around 80% by 2027. That will be not only on a riskier path, but also there will be less room for accommodating aging-related spending that are looming in the future. So what is our policy advice in this context? In the near term, fiscal policies should basically support, or at least not work in the opposite direction from monetary policy. Inflation is still a big problem, and we hope that the fiscal policy will contribute to support efforts by monetary policy to combat inflation. In practical terms, we recommend a slight tightening compared to the fiscal path, to the current fiscal path, of around 1/4 of a percentage point next year. This will help this will help monetary policy again in its fight against inflation, but also it will, and this is important, it will leave room for spending, needed spending for security, defense, and also to partly shield vulnerable from higher energy prices. So where to find savings? One important consideration that we had during the mission is relatively untargeted way the households are supported are supported in the or are cushioned from higher energy prices. A way that is, or measures that are more targeted and that would also better incentivize energy savings would be preferable. This could be accompanied by some tax increases, for instance, an increase in so-called solidarity tax or higher taxes on corporate sector. But the primary channel would be better targeting of these support measures. Then, maybe one important consideration is also that if situation worsens, if the recession proves deeper than we project, then the policy obviously needs to adjust. So we expect that support would be needed to a larger extent if the recession is deeper. Over the medium term, Finland needs sizable fiscal consolidation, and this consolidation is needed to put the debt ratio on a slightly declining path at least. And we recommend a gradual consolidation by around 0.5 percentage point per year in the medium term, which would reduce fiscal risks, and importantly, as I mentioned when I discussed the nature of these fiscal risks, it would also create room for aging-related spending in the future. How to generate savings in the medium term? So this requires a careful consideration, careful examination of taxes and expenditures, and here we very much welcome the Ministry of Finance work in this area. One area that requires or that demands special consideration is the health sector and health and social spending. The reform of the health system and the establishment of well-being service counties could generate substantial savings because of consolidation of certain functions, because of possibly use of new technologies, new investments. But the financial incentives to generate these savings are not that strong. So carefully monitoring this reform and reacting if these savings are not there would be an important element of government policy and of the consolidation package going forward. Also importantly, to deliver on this consolidation, a robust fiscal framework is needed. That would help maintain discipline and would also help in communication. Here, we very much welcome the Ministry of Finance proposal for the new framework. This new framework would be based on sustainability consideration. It would inform both the balance targets and also the expenditure ceilings targets. And these expenditure ceilings targets would also cover more than one parliamentary term, which would be a very welcome development. It also appropriately extends expenditure ceilings to well-being counties. This is again important in the context of the size of these health sector expenditures in Finland. Moving on to structural reforms. Further boosting employment and productivity is also very important both for growth but also for sustainability. And regarding employment, we again very much commend the authorities on measures implemented as part of the government program. And in particular, closing so-called unemployment tunnel to retirement has proved very effective. So some further steps in this direction could be considered. Secondly, we also encourage reforms to in-work and out-of-work benefits that would reduce work disincentives and also help boost employment. An important element of the government plan is boosting R&D spending. Boosting R&D spending, increasing R&D spending to around 4% of GDP is an important target. And part of this adjustment or part of this increase would come from the private sector. So here what is important is making sure that the tax incentives to increase this R&D spending would go to areas where they would be most efficient. And that means SMEs, startups, and smaller companies generally. One of the reforms that has been around also for a while and has proved to be very important is the reform of the tertiary education system, or improving access to tertiary education system. And here again, we welcome progress, but there are some steps that could be taken to make this access to tertiary education easier, and perhaps increasing resources there would also help. An important consideration in the context of current wage negotiation is the reform or the features of the collective bargaining system. So the recent wage negotiations, especially in the public sector, have weakened to some extent the coordination mechanism in the system. This system has already been less formal than in other Nordics. And here we recommend very decisive or more decisive actions from all social partners to agree on a system that ensures sufficient flexibility, but also ensures sufficient coordination to protect and safeguard competitiveness. On climate policies, we definitely applaud Finland's very ambitious targets. And the energy crisis has clearly demonstrated the importance of shifting away from fossil fuels. Finland has made very considerable progress in this direction, but achieving carbon emission targets will require further measures. One of such measures could be increasing taxation of carbon-intensive peat production. But when energy prices subside, there is also a scope for increasing and harmonizing carbon pricing. Let me finally touch upon financial sector policies. The ongoing IMF Financial Sector Assessment Program, which is a specialized review of the financial sector done concurrently with the Article 4 in this round, has found that banks are generally well capitalized, profitable, and in terms of solvency, resilient to shocks. But banks are also heavily exposed to short-term wholesale funding, and enhancing liquidity buffers would help them make even more resilient. Banks are also exposed to risks from the housing market, given large household indebtedness, and to developments in the Nordic region, given their high cross-border exposures. And to mitigate these risks, we recommend expanding resources of financial oversight agencies. We recommend expanding the macroprudential toolkit, and also, but only as circumstances allow, tightening capital requirements. And the authorities has already taken important steps to address vulnerabilities related to high household debt. Nevertheless, legislating caps on debt to income and debt service to income ratios would still help. Regarding capital buffers, we very much welcome the increases in requirements for systematically important institutions that will be coming into force in January. And we also welcome the readiness of the authorities to fully reinstate systemic requirements elsewhere. The latter, though, will have to wait until circumstances, cyclical circumstances allow. Finally, legislating a positive neutral counter-cyclical buffer would also increase resilience in the banking system even more. I'll stop here and open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maliszewski. Now we are ready to turn to possible questions. In the room, please use microphone. Those of you online, please use the comment box and remember to write down your media and name. No questions? Yeah.
Thank you, Petri Korna from the Democratic magazine. I have to ask you a populist question. If Finland was a student in economics, in the university student, what kind of grade would you give us?
Very good question. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure about the Finnish grading scale. So this is a problem. But generally speaking, Finland is an advanced economy facing problems as any other advanced economy is facing now. And it has been coping very well in the short term. It has been coping very well with the COVID crisis. And it has been very active in terms of preparing for future challenges. And there are still some homework to be done, as for every student. And what we are saying in the concluding statement is part of this homework. And the homework is mainly related to long-term or medium to long-term issues. And again, I think fiscal adjustment is part of this homework that needs to be done to make sure that it is the top grade.
Thank you very much. If there's no other questions, we can end the press conference and continue with the TV interviews outside. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.